Desires and determination on the path. Once, when Venerable Ananda was staying in a park, a Brahmin came to him and asked him what the goal of his practice was. Ananda replied that the goal was to abandon desire. The Brahmin then asked whether there was a path of practice leading to the abandoning of desire, and Ananda replied that there was. He then described the path in terms of a teaching called the 4 bases of power. Mental power endowed with concentration based on one of the 4 things: desire, persistence, intent, and analysis, along with the fabrications of exertion or right effort. The Brahman then replied that the path would have to be an endless path, because there was no way you could abandon desire by means of desire. Ananda responded with an analogy framed as a series of questions. Before the Brahman came to the park, didn't he have a desire to come? Didn't he make an effort to act on that desire? And when he arrived, wasn't that desire allayed? The Brahman admitted that was the case. In the same way, Ananda continued, when a person has attained total awakening, whatever desire he or she had for awakening, whatever effort he or she made for awakening, is allayed. Samyutta Nikaya 51:15. This analogy explains several aspects of the role of desire in developing the 4th Noble Truth, the path to the end of suffering. You need the desire for awakening in order to undertake the path. While you're on the path, you need more than just desire. You also need right concentration, right effort, and, by implication, all the other factors of the path and the triple training. You finally overcome your desire for awakening, not by suppressing or denying it, but by satisfying it. You satisfy it by using it in the course of developing the path. These facts are reflected in the Buddha's extended discussion of the 4 Noble Truths in Digha Nikaya 22. There he notes that one of the main forms of suffering is not getting what you want, and he defines what you want as freedom from aging, illness, and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, distress, and despair. Simply wanting to gain these forms of freedom through the power of your desire is to suffer. But the Buddha doesn't tell you not to want them. After all, these were the wants that drove his own search for awakening in the first place. Majjhima Nikaya 26. Instead, he advises you to channel those wants into developing the path. That's how he gained results, and how you'll gain results too. The standard definitions for the factors of the path show that desire plays an explicit role in 2 of them: right resolve and right effort. Right resolve is the determination to abandon resolves for sensual passion, ill will, and harmfulness, and to develop in their place resolves for renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness. These 3 resolves to be abandoned come under the first 2 of the hindrances, sensual desire and ill will. These hindrances, you may recall, are the conditions that sustain ignorance. This means that the resolves to be developed are aimed at putting an end to those conditions. Right resolve is, for this reason, the active side of the training in heightened discernment. You not only know the 4 Noble Truths, but, based on that knowledge, you also resolve to put an end to the conditions that keep you from mastering those truths along with their duties. That resolve is wise. Right effort is defined as generating desire, arousing persistence, and upholding your intent to do 4 things. To prevent unskillful mental qualities from arising, to abandon those that have already arisen, to give rise to skillful mental qualities, and to develop to their culmination any skillful mental qualities that have already arisen. Right resolve comes under the training of heightened discernment, right effort under the training in heightened mind. This fact would make it seem as if there's no role for desire in the other aspect of the triple training, the training in heightened virtue, but that's not the case. The Buddha points out that right effort circles around every factor of the path, generating the desire to give rise to the right version of that factor and to abandon the wrong version. Majjhima Nikaya 117. For example, you have to generate desire to abandon wrong speech and wrong action, and to stay within the bounds of right speech and right action. This is why one of the Buddha's most common teachings to people at large was to point out the rewards of virtue in this life and the next, so that they would generate the desire to practice virtue themselves. Digha Nikaya 16. What's striking about the role of desire in developing the path is that it holds to an overarching skillful desire, the desire for awakening, to determine which desires should be encouraged and which should be abandoned. In other words, you establish priorities among your desires and you use skillful desires to stick to your priorities. Then you train yourself, with the help of the training you receive from others, to hold to those priorities every time you're faced with the choice of encouraging one desire over another. If there weren't any conflict among your desires, there would be no need for training. This means that, by its very nature, training will involve inner conflict. There's no way you can progress in training without it. As we survey each part of the triple training, we'll see exactly how this conflict plays out as you progress along the path. This policy of holding to one desire so as to overcome any other desires that would get in the way is called determination. Adhikkhana. Ironically, given the overriding role that determination plays in the path, the canon contains only one passage where the Buddha discusses in any detail what it means to be determined on awakening. It's Majjhima Nikaya 140. There, he separates this determination into 4 aims that all come together with the realization of unbinding. 1. In aiming at unbinding, you're determined on discernment, because the knowledge of the ending of the effluence, the final knowledge before the experience of unbinding, is the highest noble discernment. 2. You're determined on truth, in that unbinding, the undeceptive, is the highest noble truth. 3. You're determined on relinquishment, because the relinquishment of mental acquisitions, the mental baggage of possessiveness that weighs you down, is the highest noble relinquishment. 4. You are determined on calm, because the abandoning of passion, aversion, and delusion is the highest noble calm. In this way, discernment and relinquishment find their highest expression in the last steps of the path to unbinding, truth and calm, in unbinding itself. The fact that, in arriving at unbinding, you've arrived at the highest expression of each of these determinations means that your overriding desires have been totally satisfied. you've managed to establish order among your various desires, skillful and unskillful, seeing that the desire for awakening offers the only prospect for genuine happiness. Now that that happiness has been found, all your desires and determinations are allayed. Honest and observant. The canon makes clear that, in order to reach the goal that offers the highest embodiment of the four determinations, you have to start with whatever powers of discernment, truthfulness, relinquishment, and calm you already have. You then develop them by using them to overcome any desires that run counter to the path. Just as you strengthen your body by exercising it, you strengthen these skillful inner powers by putting them to use. The canon associates each of these determinations with a verb. You're determined not to neglect discernment, to guard the truth, to be committed to relinquishment, and to train only for calm. Not neglecting discernment means that you always keep in mind the questions that lie at the basis of discernment. What is skillful? What is unskillful? What is blameworthy? What is blameless? What should be cultivated? What should not be cultivated? And finally, the questions that summarize the rest. What, when I do it, will lead to my long-term harm and suffering? What, when I do it, will lead to my long-term well-being and happiness? Majjhima Nikaya 135. You see that long-term happiness is possible, that it will depend on your actions, and that long-term is better than short-term. So you always keep the long-term results of your actions in mind. This means that genuine discernment, instead of focusing exclusively on the present moment, takes the future into consideration as well, as you keep in mind the long-term consequences of what you're doing in the present moment. This fact is reflected in the passages where the Buddha recommends focusing on what needs to be done right now. In every case, these passages come in the context of his discussions of mindfulness of death. Given that you could die at any moment, you should do what you can right now to master the skills you'll need to handle death well. Majjhima Nikaya 131, Anguttara Nikaya 577, Anguttara Nikaya 619 through 20. The need to take the future into consideration is also reflected in the passage with which we opened this book. When Sariputta explains why the Buddha recommends abandoning unskillful qualities and developing skillful ones, the reasons encompass the results both in the present moment and well into the future. Samyutta Nikaya 22.2. Guarding the truth means being clear about what you base your opinions about the truth on. Hearsay, tradition, reasoning, logic, direct experience. Of the possible bases for your opinions, the Buddha says that only direct experience is reliable. Majjhima Nikaya 95. And that it's reliable only when you yourself have become a reliable person. Majjhima Nikaya 110. So, truth is a quality not only of intellectual honesty, but also of personal integrity. Being committed to relinquishment means finding joy in abandoning any attachment that weighs the mind down and, once you've abandoned it, letting it go for good. Training only for calm means abandoning anything, within or without, that disturbs the mind. Here it's worth noting that, in the beginning stages, you focus on eliminating disturbances that would pull you off the path. Only as the path develops do you begin to focus on disturbances within the path itself. It's also worth noting that, on this level of developing the 4 determinations, 3 of them, discernment, truthfulness, and relinquishment, function as means. Calm, even here, is a quality for whose sake you train. By developing these 4 qualities in these ways, you can overcome desires that are ignorant, deceptive, grasping, or agitated. You're also going against many of the common habits that the world at large uses in pursuing its desires. The habit of going for quick results without the thought for long-term consequences. The habit of using deceit when you can't get what you want through honest means. The habit of accumulating as much as you can. And the habit of looking for happiness in variety, excitement, and change for the sake of change. In an image frequently used in the canon, when you take on the practice, you stop flowing along with the passions of the world. Instead, you go against the stream, even when it's hard. Anguttara Nikaya 4.5. It's hard because the desires that flow against the 4 determinations don't give in easily. After all, they've been in charge of the mind for who knows how many eons. And just because these desires are ignorant doesn't mean they're not clever. They can easily have you fooled, and have had you fooled for a long, long time. They can even quote Dhamma to their own purposes when they want to, lulling you into thinking that by fighting them, you strengthen them. So you should avoid challenging them, or that because contentment is a virtue, it's best just to accept them and be at peace with them. The Buddha, however, never shied away from the fact that the practice will involve an internal battle. This is why he used so many martial analogies to rouse his monks to be up for the fight. For instance, he compared the practice to a fortress on a frontier. Mindfulness is like the gatekeeper who knows how to recognize enemies, unskillful mental qualities, and keep them from entering the fortress. Persistence is like the soldiers who defend the fortress, while learning the Dhamma is like providing the soldiers with weapons. Anguttara Nikaya 763. In another analogy, the Buddha says that a monk who disrobes on hearing that there's a beautiful woman in a nearby village is like a warrior who, on seeing the cloud of dust raised by an approaching army, can't steel himself to enter the battle. A monk who disrobes when a woman throws herself all over him is like a warrior who falls mortally wounded in hand-to-hand combat. However, a monk who can extricate himself from a situation like that and go into the wilderness where he gains awakening is like a warrior who, when engaged in hand-to-hand combat, comes out victorious. Anguttara Nikaya 575. An important parallel between a monk and a warrior is that, because the mind can change direction so quickly, especially when it meets with internal resistance, you need to be trained to stick with the battle and to see it all the way through. The training the Buddha offers is twofold, from without and from within. Because you're starting from ignorance, you need training from other people who are already more advanced on the path than you are. People of this sort are not only capable of giving you instruction when you need it, but they can also rouse, urge, and encourage you when you don't feel up for the fight. These, in fact, are precisely the verbs the canon uses to describe how the Buddha and his monks taught their students. unlike the Samana schools that could only instruct others in their teachings on the powerlessness of human action, the Buddha, in teaching the power of human action, could provide a complete course of training that both informed his students of the possibility and desirability of taking on the training, and also fired up their hearts to exercise the power of their own actions as far as possible. That's training from without. You also need training from within, because the actual battle is inside your mind. It's a battle that only you can fight. This means that you have to be alert to what's happening in your mind from moment to moment to see how and where the battle lines have shifted. To deal effectively with your inner battles, you can't simply internalize general lessons from the outside. You need to develop your powers of observation and your own ingenuity to generate solutions to specific internal problems on time. That's the training from within. Both sides of the training rely on the first two of the determinations, discernment and truth, in their more rudimentary forms of being observant and honest. In receiving training from others, you have to observe what's going on in your mind and in your behavior in general, and report it honestly to those who are training you. That way, they can trust you and be genuinely helpful in giving advice. In training yourself, you have to be observant and honest about what you're doing and the results you're getting from your actions. In particular, you have to pay attention to what's working and what's not working in dealing with unskillful desires, so that you can solve problems quickly and not let them fester, and so that your unskillful desires don't pull the wool over your eyes. When you become truthful and discerning in these ways, you have a good foundation for developing the other two determinations, relinquishment and calm. That's why the Buddha didn't teach only peaceful or unburdened people, but it's also why he noted clearly that not everyone could be trained. Only if someone were honest and observant would he be willing to take that person on as a student fit to be tamed. Starting out right. It's also why, when he began training his own son, Rahula, he started out with lessons in how best to develop qualities of honesty and powers of observation, focused on one's own actions. Majjhima Nikaya 61. These two qualities function as the beginning step in the training in heightened virtue, but then also inform the training in heightened mind and heightened discernment. First, he taught truthfulness. Rahula had seen the Buddha approaching from afar, so he set out a pot of water and a dipper. When the Buddha arrived, he washed his feet with the water in the pot, leaving a little water in the dipper. Showing the dipper to Rahula, he asked him, "Do you see how little water there is in this dipper?" "Yes, sir." "That's how little the quality of a contemplative there is in anyone who tells a deliberate lie with no sense of shame." The Buddha then threw the water away, showed Rahula the empty dipper, and finally turned the dipper upside down, making the point that when you tell a deliberate lie with no sense of shame, your quality of a contemplative is thrown away, empty, and turned upside down. He then told Rahula to train himself. "I will not tell a deliberate lie, even in jest." Having stressed the importance of truthfulness, the Buddha went on to give instructions on how to be observant. Just as you'd use a mirror repeatedly to reflect on your own face in the same way, you should reflect on your own actions again and again. When planning to do an action in body, speech, or mind, you should reflect on the intention and desire behind it. This action I want to do, would it lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both? Would it be an unskillful action with painful consequences, painful results? If you anticipate that it would cause harm, you shouldn't do it. If you anticipate no harm, you can go ahead and do it. While doing the action, you should reflect on its immediate results. This action I'm doing, is it leading to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both? If you see that it's causing harm, you should stop then and there. If you see no harm, you can continue with it. After the action is done, you're still not done. You should reflect on it again. This action I've done, did it lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both? Was it an unskillful action with painful consequences, painful results? If you see that it did cause harm, even though you didn't anticipate it, then, if it was a bodily or verbal action, you should confess it to a fellow practitioner more advanced on the path, to see what advice you can gain on how not to repeat that mistake. Then you try to exercise restraint in the future. If it was a mental action, you should develop a healthy sense of shame around it, seeing that it was beneath you, and exercise future restraint. But if you see that the action caused no harm at all, then you take joy in that fact, and continue training in this way, day and night. These are basically instructions for how Rahula should develop his honesty and powers of observation to detect for himself which of his desires, when acted on, would be helpful on the path, and which would get in the way. But the Buddha covers a lot of other issues as well, in particular the other qualities of heart and mind that his son will have to bring to this task. To begin with, he's introducing Rahula to the quality that he said elsewhere is the most important internal quality for achieving your first glimpse of awakening: appropriate attention. This is the ability to focus attention on asking the right questions for the sake of overcoming unskillful desires and developing skillful ones. These questions begin with the underlying questions leading to discernment as to which actions are skillful and which actions are not, and culminate in the questions related to the Four Noble Truths, understanding suffering, and developing the path that leads to its end. Appropriate attention is what gives proper focus to your powers of observation and your truthfulness. You focus attention on your actions, beginning with your desires and intentions, and judge them as to whether you expect them to be harmful or not. This step emphasizes the role of desire as the root of all intentions, as the role of intention, the desire to act, as the beginning of Kamma. It also teaches you that, if you really want to learn from your mistakes, you try your best not to make them. When you act only on what you think are good intentions, but later find out that actions based on those intentions led to harm, you've learned something. If you act on intentions you already know to be unskillful and they end up causing harm, you haven't learned much. Once you've set yourself on a course of action you think is skillful, then, given that actions can show some of their results in the present moment and some over time, you judge the results of your actions both while you're doing them and after they're done. Here you use the same criteria. Are they causing? Did they cause harm or not? And, of course, you don't stop with simply judging the results. You refrain from acting on intentions you judge to be potentially harmful. You stop continuing with any action you judge to be immediately harmful, and you resolve not to repeat any actions that turned out to be harmful in the end. These instructions show the basic pattern for how to train yourself to stick with your determination for awakening. You commit to the path by trying to act in line with it. You reflect on the results of your actions, and then make adjustments wherever you see that you're lacking until you finally get things right. This is called success by approximation. As we'll see, this pattern holds all the way to the end of practice. In teaching Rahula to talk over his mistakes with someone more advanced on the path, the Buddha is introducing him to the most important external quality for achieving his first glimpse of awakening: admirable friendship. This is a matter not only of trying to choose admirable people as your friends, but also of emulating their good qualities and asking them about how to develop those qualities in yourself. Anguttara Nikaya 854. As the Buddha's instructions to Rahula make clear, this relationship works best if you're truthful in reporting your mistakes to your friends so that you can get pertinent advice. The Buddha is also introducing his son more generally to training in heightened virtue. It's important to notice that this training takes two forms: specific do's and don'ts, and qualities of the character. He starts Rahula with a don't. I will not tell a deliberate lie even in jest. As he points out, this is a rule that Rahula will have to train himself in. In other words, Rahula will have to be responsible for voluntarily taking on this rule, for sticking with it, and for detecting times when he's failed to hold it, so that he can learn what unskillful desires or passions might have made him want to break it. At the same time, the Buddha is teaching Rahula virtue in terms of the qualities of the character, both explicitly and implicitly. The quality he mentions explicitly is shame. Not the unhealthy shame that's the opposite of pride, but the healthy shame that's the opposite of shamelessness. This is the shame that makes you want your behavior to look good in the eyes of people you respect. When you respect the right people, the noble ones, this type of shame can take you far. It goes together with a sense of honor, that giving in to unskillful desires is beneath you. Other qualities that are more implicit in these instructions include heedfulness, in that Rahula should take the results of his actions seriously because they could cause harm if he's not careful. Compassion, in that he shouldn't want to do harm to anyone, himself or others. Integrity, in taking responsibility for any harm that he's done. Notice how often the word I appears in the questions that Rahula is supposed to ask himself. He's being taught to acknowledge his agency in deciding which desires to act on and how best to do it. Finally, the Buddha is also teaching Rahula how to develop the 4 determinations. He learns truthfulness in his willingness to admit his mistakes. He commits himself to relinquish any desires that would run counter to this training. Note that when Rahula is able to reflect on his actions and see that they have caused no harm, he is to take joy in that fact. That sense of joy is calming. the calm that comes from a life of virtue. This is a pattern that holds throughout the triple training. You don't simply force yourself to become calm and equanimous regardless of events. You first have to find an inner sense of joy that comes from virtue, concentration, and discernment. That joy keeps your calm from becoming grudging or defeatist. Based on a sense of inner satisfaction, it's a calm that's expansive and strong. Above all, Rahula is learning to develop his discernment through a process that, as we've noted, the Buddha calls commitment and reflection. Rahula is to commit himself to acting as skillfully as he can, at the same time reflecting on the desire that motivates each action, the action itself, and its immediate and long-term results. When he sees room for improvement, he commits himself further to making that improvement as best he can, using both his own determination to be skillful and ingenious in thinking up alternates, and the wisdom and compassion of others who can help him attain that aim. As we noted above, the questions that lie at the basis of discernment are: what, when I do it, will lead to my long-term harm and suffering? What, when I do it, will lead to my long-term well-being and happiness? In the discourse where the Buddha sets forth these questions, Majjhima Nikaya 135, he recommends requesting answers from people who are more advanced on the path. Here, however, Rahula is also being taught how to begin finding the answers for himself. This is the basic approach that's required in learning any skill, although here it's applied to an especially high level of skill, putting an end to all suffering and stress. It's the basic framework for all the steps in taking on the triple training. And as we've already noted, it depends on what the Buddha observed about the mind, that it's luminous and has, in the present moment, the power of choice, together with the ability to change direction quickly. The power of choice allows you to commit to a course of action. The luminosity allows you to reflect on the results of following that course. At the same time, to check to see whether the mind has switched direction away from its commitment, while its ability to change course allows you to make adjustments as they seem advisable. In terms of dependent co-arising, this approach is the way to overcome the ignorance, avidya, which, as we noted, can also mean lack of skill, that causes your processes of fabrication to lead to suffering. As you observe for yourself which desires work and which don't work, and as your standards for what works grow higher as you develop virtue, concentration, and discernment, you weaken ignorant desires and replace them with knowledgeable and skillful ones. In that way, you grow closer and closer to total freedom. Those are some of the qualities of character that the Buddha taught to Rahula. If we want to understand virtue as taught by the Buddha, we have to understand both the rules of behavior he laid down, clearly delineating right and wrong, as well as the qualities of character he praised and tried to inculcate in his students. The rules are there to alert you to specific unskillful desires and passions that could hide behind general principles, as when you claim to be acting on compassion when it's nothing more than an excuse for what's actually unskillful behavior. They teach you that no unskillful desire is too small to merit your attention. After all, Big fires come from little ones. At the same time, the qualities of character enable you to deal skillfully with areas calling for integrity that can't properly be covered by rules. It's in this way that the training in virtue offered by the Buddha is both thorough and all around.